Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Russia is having trouble sustaining its aggressive memento, specifically because nothing really has been achieved and they sustained horrific losses. They're still trying to attack, but as I described last time, the interval between those attacks is increasing more and more, and right now we are in a situation where there are local tactical fights all across the front lines, but no kind of major attacks or pushes are ongoing. The only direction that I can somewhat mention in this today's view is the area around Bakhmut, where in the area from Kromove, Russians are indeed pushing up a little bit hard. But don't get me wrong, fights are happening all across the front lines. But as Ukrainians are reporting it themselves, there is tough. It's always problematic, war is hell, but they are holding and as I said, the advantages of Russia are being neglected. They are just completely finalizing any kind of resources that they had for a potential offensive campaign. So right now, Russia is nowhere. We debunked already the potential claims for Russia to advance into the Kharkiv direction. But the important news that will help shape the future of Ukraine are right now not coming from the front lines, but instead from the country's capital, Kyiv. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, has come to Ukraine and they have signed a protection, basically somewhat of a semi-alliance deal with Ukraine. It's a document that I enjoy extremely enjoy it, because that is the document where United Kingdom not only swears and agrees to whatever they are supplying right now to help Ukraine win, but it's also the document that states that United Kingdom will definitely provide equipment and help to Ukraine in case of a further Russian aggression. This is a very important document. We have discussed it. I even have a short clips about this, and I answered that. Oh, that was a question: does Ukraine needs nuclear warheads for them to deter Russia if when the war ends? And I said that Ukraine doesn't really need specifically nuclear warheads. What Ukraine needs is security guarantees. And basically what this visit by the Rishi Sunak to Ukraine, is that they signed a document on the security guarantees for Ukraine until Ukraine joins NATO, which is amazing news. It opens a whole plethora of possibilities for Ukraine. It very clearly defines that United Kingdom needs to supply Ukraine with equipment, and they are pledging to supply help for Ukraine. Beyond that, good news are also coming from the European Union, where European Union spokespeople say that while they are not fully reaching the goal of supplying 1 million shells by the end of February as they were planning, they are still hoping to supply the majority of it by the end of spring. So while we are having delays on the EU side with regards to supplying the ammunition shells, they are also reporting that the increase in shell production in European Union is ramping up. It is expected that by the end of spring, EU will also be producing 1 million shell per year target from now on. So it will be already a good baseline. And as I explained to you the issues for Ukraine with the artillery shell production is that Ukrainian army is heavily dependent on artillery shells. In the European NATO countries, most of the job what Ukrainian artillery is doing right now is actually being performed by the aviation. And that's why I say that it's going to be really great for Ukraine to get F-16s, because at that moment it will also start taking away some of that requirement for a lot of hard work for the artillery to perform. So some of the precision strikes, some of the specific target destructions and so on will potentially go to the aviation part of the Ukrainian military. Beyond that, drones and drone technology and investments that both Ukraine wants to do in drones, and also what was signed with Rishi Sunak in the agreement in Kyiv, is additional investment in a drone technology. Drones are providing as a nice new semi-alternative, more of a synergetic path that will also take away some of the pressure off from the artillery of Ukraine. This brings the requirement for Ukrainian artillery to execute all of the tasks that it needs to a much, much lower number. So even if European Union and US cannot supply the shells that Ukraine would need to fire the war like Russians were firing at the start of the war, it will still be enough to supply to Ukraine to fight it into this new way with the aviation component and with the heavy drone component. It's very good news, and it's very nice to see that the bottlenecks are being distributed, and we will not have one specific area kind of dominating and requiring more than any kind of production capacity can deliver. And talking about drones, one thing that some of the people asked me about in private was when I was talking last time about these kind of drones that Ukraine has started using, what are actual benefits, advantages, or disadvantages of using these drones? So the warhead on this drone is called the explosively formed penetrator or explosively formed projectile warhead. I'll try to explain. So MedSkills drawing right here. What we know about the armor of the tanks is that its armor is quite thick, and it can protect from a lot of weapons and other projectiles penetrating its armor. This comes to the specific physics. We know that if the area of attack is larger against the armor, that will mean that the force will get dissipated and it will be having less penetrative force, the projectile. But if the projectile is instead very, very narrow, that will concentrate all of the force in a specific part, and it can achieve greater penetration of this arrow. So then we go into the understanding of what does the classic anti-tank round consists of, and why is it good and why is it not so good for the situation that Ukraine is right now. So the classic anti-tank round, it looks something like this. It's like a cone, and there is like explosives here. And these explosives, when they detonate, they apply pressure to this cone from all sides, which propels this metal cone that goes to form like a narrow jet stream of liquefied and hot metal that will be propelled forward with a large speed to achieve penetration of the tank armor. That is the anti-tank round. And that's how it's designed. The problem that Ukraine is having is that this round is designed specifically to achieve the force of penetration. So when we're talking about how much damage it does, then it gets different. Because at that moment, we know that the outside explosion is going to be relatively small because of the way that the tank is, that the charge is designed. Because it's designed specifically so the force goes into this direction to create this jet stream. The point of this is so that jet stream penetrates the tank armor and burns down everything that is on the inside. Preferably some sensitive components, go through the engine, the equipment, maybe the crew, and creates a lot of nastiness for the tank crew inside of it, the vehicle. However, Ukraine is using drones not always to strike tanks. Ukraine often uses drones to also strike lighter armored vehicles. And the issue of having the anti-tank rounds is that both the explosion is relatively small and also the consequences of that explosion is relatively small. It's not something that's very often shared by the FPV video drones, but sometimes we actually see quite a lot of this. So a good example was just recently I saw like lightly armored, not lightly armored, but like non-armored civil vehicle that was driven by Russians, which received a shot from the FPV drone with the RPG-7 round. And that round came into the driver's door. It really bent the door of the driver. It really deformed. Driver got some injuries. But then that jet stream from that explosion went through that door, went through the driver's legs, penetrated where the pedals are, and did actually not that much. It's a little bit of a work, yes, but that vehicle can be really repaired and get up into action, maybe with a new door or something like this. The point is, it didn't achieve enough explosive and damaging power as Ukrainians would need. So why would we use the shaped charge, and how Russia is fighting it? Well, if we're talking about tanks, then when this jet stream is penetrated, Russia has been using two major counters. One is the grill chain network, grid. So in this grill grid that they're putting on the tanks is preventing close enough contact between the charge and the armor located. So when it explodes against the grid, then instead this jet fuel is traveling longer distance and creates certain distortion, and that doesn't allow for a deep enough penetrative and strong enough penetrative power of that charge to occur, therefore preventing the damage to be done to a tank. Second way how Russia is fighting these charges is that they are using the reactive armor. Reactive armor is like a boxes on top of the tanks that contain explosives. So when the jet stream hits one of these boxes, these explosives react, as per name, and they explode outwards. So they counteract the forces that are applied towards the armor of the tank. The explosion doesn't really damage the tank because the armor is so thick, but it disrupts the jet stream and it prevents the penetration to occur. There might be still a bump or something, but it doesn't achieve that damage that it needs. So how is now different for Ukraine, and why the other charges that they're called the explosively formed projectiles are better? It all comes down to understanding the tanks and what they're designed to do and how are they designed. So tanks are vehicles with a turret, and these tanks were initially designed to be forward pushing vehicles, having in mind tank-on-tank combat from the Second World War and so on. And we know that specifically for tanks, the front armor is the thickest on the tank, so it can hold any shots fired at him from the front. That's why, for example, Javelin missiles are so effective, because they come down on the top where the armor of the tanks is actually weaker. And the armor is also weaker on the tanks on the end side, on the rear side. And this brings us to the Ukrainians using the formed charges. Because these tanks were not designed when drones were a thing, they are having a lot of these armors in the front, which is great for them. But drones, they don't care where they fly in. They don't have to fly in at front of the tank. They can fly in from the top, they can fly in from the tank in the back, and then fire in the back. And most importantly, for Russian tanks, their design is it has very significant flaw. So around this space over here, where the Russian turrets of the tank are located, right under the turret of the tank in Russia, there is this carousel with an autoloader with the shells that are being loaded to be fired. That was done to make the tank have less crew and make it simpler to operate and build. The point is, and Ukrainians know that really well. So their drones are actually aiming very often for specifically that point. So then the charge would hit this part, and hopefully it would critically detonate the shells that are located inside of this carousel, and we would see certain turret toss. That is the general principle. But you might already see where the issue is. That I told you about the lightly armored vehicles and non-armored vehicles. So these vehicles, they don't really have that much armor to be dealt with. So the bigger explosion and having a larger charge would bring so much more damage than this narrow penetrative round. Because how this explosively formed charge operates, it looks like this. There is a box. It has like explosives that are applying the force towards this charge. This metal plate that is over here, it actually bends backwards and creates like a solid core that is then being projected forward from the charge. Now, this core, as we discussed it from the start, doesn't have the penetrative power. But because a lot of vehicles that Ukraine is trying to attack are actually more of a cargo vehicles or something, and B, because they are targeting tanks where their armor is actually weakest, that means that for Ukrainians, they might not need that penetrative power that much. Don't get me wrong, this can still, like this one, it can still penetrate lighter armor. It can still fly into some of the older tanks like T-62s and so on that don't have that much armor in the back at all and cause serious damage because this formed core, formed charge creates significant damages to the equipment and pretty much guarantees that whatever it hits gets destroyed. And that is why it's a big deal, because it's a reuse of technologies that could not be used at a certain time before to now being used with the ability of navigating that charge all across the tank and specifically targeting the weak spot. And obviously, because it's a core, it's like a form charged actually. So when we're talking about the reactive armor, well, reactive armor not often is located on these places on the tank because sometimes it's moving pieces over there and so on. Reactive armor usually is placed in places where the armor is the thickest because remember, this thing also explodes. So if the explosion is also hard enough, it can also help penetrate the armor itself. And secondly, if we're talking about the grills that Russians are installing all over the tanks, their vehicles, everything, then compared to the jet stream, these grills don't really help against this core because it's a piece of metal which is like quite big and is propelled at high force. So it just goes through these like butter. They don't do anything against it. And to close out the topic about drones, one of the interesting stories is actually from the area of Krinky, where Ukraine is holding their bridgehead. So Russians here got so paranoid because they are having such a big trouble with Ukrainian drones that they are now shooting at all of the drones that are flying in the area. So Russians now that even want to kind of use drones to fight Ukrainians in the area are having trouble because Russian forces themselves are shooting down friendly drones because they are so paranoid. So it's a huge problem for the Russian droners in the area, and I thought it was interesting to share. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. Last news that I want to share with you is that we have completed our donation target for the Ukrainian Armed Forces with the NAFO 69 Sniffing Brigades. 2 trucks will be on the way to Ukrainian Armed Forces. Thank you so much. If you really want the patch and want to participate, I think you can still submit, but the campaign is now closed. It's done. Great job. Slava Ukraini. I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.